I think the Frankenstein squat is the single best squat variation for teaching you how to squat. Not necessarily to build your squat, but teaching you how to squat well. And once you have a blueprint for how that squat works, you can really easily translate that to every other lift. Welcome back. So today we are making a video on the Frankenstein squat. Now, I spend a lot of time being a proponent of the Frankenstein squat, so I thought it's probably about time that we made a video kind of trying to justify why that is, right? So just for clarity, when we're referring to a Frankenstein squat, others call it like a zombie squat, where we're squatting down with the bar in the front rack position, but with the arms out in front as opposed to like across the shoulders or in the front rack position, okay? Now, I think the Frankenstein squat is the single best squat variation for teaching you how to squat. Not necessarily to build your squat, but teaching you how to squat well. And once you have a blueprint for how that squat works, you can really easily translate that to every other lift, whether it's a front squat, a zercher squat, a back squat, it doesn't matter, right? So before we can really talk about why a Frankenstein squat is so good for this purpose, we kind of need to define what a squat is. And I know that sounds really abstract and stupid, right? But hear me out. So when we are looking at the squat, and I'm going to make life easier on myself today with this, right? We can all probably admit or agree, that, this would be a squat, right? You just look at it and say, well, duh, of course it is, right? But then let's say I go super wide and then I kind of do the same thing, but my hips travel back more. We would probably also say that that is a squat. But then we can probably all agree then that there's going to be a spectrum of what we'd class as a good and a bad squat, right? So we might say that this is a good squat, but then maybe this is a bad squat, right? We call it like a squat good morning, right? So the hips come up earlier. So the question then becomes, at what point does a squat actually kind of become not a squat and become like this two-phase squat good morning pattern, right? And if you watch 90+% of lifters squat from the side, the thing that we're going to see is on the way down, the bar is going to end up in front of their midfoot, so in front of their center of mass. Because it's now in front of their center of mass, they have to somehow pull it back this way to get it over your center of mass, which you can't do through your knee joint. The only way you can do that is through the hips, right? Because the hips pull everything back towards the midline, whereas knees, when they flex and extend, they pull us this way. So if you've gotten to the bottom of your squat and the bar is in front of your center of mass, you basically don't have any other choice but for the hips to come up and then kind of rescue the bar and pull it back. So what we want, the differentiating factor then between, for arbitrary sake, a good squat and a bad squat is going to be the relationship between the hips and the shoulders, right? So as we come out of the bottom position, what we should see is the knees stay forward and then the hips and the shoulders rise together. And the torso angle only really changes when you get to about halfway up, because that's kind of what it should be. The torso angle does most of its change on the way down in the top half and is stable in the bottom half. And then the torso angle stays pretty much the same for the bottom half on the way back up and then changes more at the top. So there are two phases. The torso angle change happens, top half stays the same in the bottom half. Now for that to happen, the knees have to stay forward, right? Because if I go down, I'm going to end up doing a lot more squats than I anticipated here. If I go down and I let my knees go back, this happens. We get the hips coming up, the torso angle goes forward, and then we end up in that squat good morning pattern. And again, this is going to be what you see 90% plus, maybe more, of lifters with almost any squat variation they do. Now, is it bad? Well, there's lots of people out there squatting lots of weight in this manner. So to say that it doesn't work would be dumb. However, is it optimal or the most efficient way you can squat? Probably not. But we can get away with it with most lifts, right? If we are, say we're doing a zercher squat, I can very easily squat down and have the hips do that. I can pull in here and salvage it. Same with a front squat. If I'm doing like a proper front rack position, or even with crossed arms, if my hips shoot back, I can still pull this on and get back up. So you end up with like this anterior loaded squat good morning. And like I said, almost all of us are doing this to some degree. It's generally worse on the back squat because there's more hip hinge, right? But the principle is the same. The way that we're squatting is not optimal, almost regardless of what variation we're doing, because we've got this pattern where we allow the bar to drift forward, which can happen for a whole bunch of different reasons. Sometimes it's ankle mobility, sometimes it's setup. A lot of the time is we don't think it's something that we need to do. We don't think about actively pushing the knees forward over the toes, whereas most of us really do need to think about that. The useful way to distinguish it might be like a squat. In your head should just be get the knees as far forward as you can and sit your butt straight down, almost regardless of what variation you're doing. Whereas obviously like a deadlift, for example, would be a hinge, would be the opposite, would be get the hips as far back. Anyway, tangent. So the approach should be to get the kneecaps as far forward over the toes as you can. And then as we push up, keep them forward. Because if I keep them forward here, now my torso angle stays the same. Whereas if I let the knees go back, this is where we get that tipping. So it's counterintuitive to most people. What you actually need to think about doing is pushing the knees forward as you come out of the bottom of the squat, because that keeps them forward, allows the glutes to extend the hip as they should do out of the bottom position. And then the quads are there in the top half of the lift to do most of the donkey work, which is where they should be doing it. And we kind of know this, right? Because let's say you were doing back squats from a pin at the midpoint, right? So about halfway up. How do you set up under the pin if the goal is to move the most amount of weight? Do you get in your squat stance and do this? So like vertical shin, yeah? And get the hips back. Do you do this? Or do you get under the bar and do this? Have the knees forward, the chest more up, and the hips more underneath you. You do this, because that allows you to move far more load. But that being the strongest position on the pin squat is also the strongest position that you should be in when you get to that same point of a full squat, yeah? So we're gonna be much stronger, we imagine, with doing our pin squat, right? So we go down. If this is me, say halfway up, this is gonna be a lot weaker than this. So this is the position we want to get into for that top half, not this. And this is kind of what we know. We'll say you go to a powerlifting competition, you'll watch a squat and be like, that's not a great squat, or, ooh, that's a really pretty squat. A lot of the time it's actually linked to this. How much backward knee travel do we get? How much do the hips rise relative to the shoulders? When we don't get that, most people look at it and go, that's a damn good squat. Even if they can't really quantify what it is about the squat that makes it great. So that's a squat, right? Torso angle reaches whatever angle it's going to be at the bottom, gets there by the time it's about halfway down. Doesn't matter whether it's low bar, high bar, front squat, doesn't matter. Same principle, it's how the body works, okay? Then it should be hip and shoulder, kind of like an elevator for the bottom half. Then the same thing happens on the way up. Hips and shoulders rise together like an elevator. Then the hips come forward primarily then in the top half. So to do that, we need to keep the knees forward. So welcome to the Frankenstein squat and why it's so useful, right? Because I'm here. What's keeping the bar on my body? Gravity and hope, primarily, right? If there's any of this, the bar is gone. I have no way of salvaging the bar if I allow the knees to shoot back, the hips to come up, and we end up in that squat good morning pattern. It teaches us how to get down, push the knees forward, sit the hips down, and then to get up, push the knees forward, and don't let the hips come up faster than the shoulders. It teaches us this and punishes us very, very intensely if we don't. The bar either ends up on the floor or on the pins, or you end up doing an accidental drop set where you end up doing a Zercher squat halfway through your Frankensteins. That's the thing. So let's look at how, now, hopefully you kind of understand why it's useful, right? It ingrains the squat pattern that most of us are subconsciously avoiding doing. You know, whether, no idea why, we'll find out. But, so how do we do it? Well, let's find out. So the first, should we say the most common complaint with the Frankenstein squat is the bar chokes me out. right? Which is understandable. My first response would be, some people pay very good money for that, so you should count yourself lucky. But once we get past that part of it, what I would say is, a big part of the reason people struggle with the discomfort here is they make it worse for themselves by having the chin up, which if you're a guy pushes your Adam's apples forward, but also they have their head forward. So all of that is protruding the neck forward into the bar where we want it, okay? So the first thing that we need to address is that when we're setting up for our Frankenstein squat, and this is gonna be funny because I'm gonna try and talk to you whilst the bar is on my throat. Right, if we're here, if I arch my head up and push my head forward, now it's pressuring on my throat considerably more. Whereas if I took the chin down and pull the head and neck back, now there's considerably less pressure. There's I would never say that's comfortable, but there's less pressure, okay? So it's also a very good exercise for drilling good head posture, because that tucked chin, head and neck back is the exact same thing you should be doing on every other squat variation and for your deadlifts and everything else for that matter. So don't make it more uncomfortable than it already is, okay? Chin down and head back, get the throat back away from the bar as best you can. Now, the other most common pitfall is just where people have the arms, right? This is going to be a good test of your mobility because you should be able to get the arms pretty high. And what I mean by that is, just walk it out. So, a Frankenstein squat does not mean having your arms like this, okay? So if you can zoom from the side angle, you can see where my arms are, right? Now, for me to get to the bottom, I'm going to have to flex from the hip a little bit. I am not going to be vertical in my torso when I get to the bottom. So I need to have a little bit of wiggle room, right? Because if I don't, say my arms are parallel to the floor at the top, and now I just hinge my hips at 10, 15 degrees, already it's going and it's gone. So you can't just set up with your arms parallel to the floor, level with your shoulders. They need to be considerably higher so that when you get to the bottom position, the arms are at least still parallel to the floor, ideally slightly up. So if I'm here, right, and now I have my arms higher, even when my hips flex and I'm at the bottom position here, my arm is still above parallel to the floor. If they're not high enough, then they would be here at this point. That's when it would fall forward. It's usually not that people lack the appropriate ankle mobility or the ability to get the depth or anything like that. It's usually that their arms aren't high enough. So when we're setting up, we're going to be here. You can use whatever squat stance is comfortable for you. The chin goes down, the head goes back. Now, if you struggle to keep your arms high enough, right? Let's say you've got weak traps, tight upper back, whatever, then what you can do to make life slightly easier would be this. Bring your arms together, prop the elbows up high, because basically what you're doing is shortening the lever of your arms. The reason that works is, if my arms are out here, this is a very long lever. Let's say my arm weighs 10 pounds, for argument's sake, right? 10 pounds spread out over this length of lever is heavier than 10 pounds spread out over that long of a lever. So if we're struggling with the arms here, then we can bring them in. Now this will do a great job of strengthening your upper back. But if that isn't the reason you've got it in your programming, well then we can make life a little bit easier on the upper back and use it more as a squat teaching tool by just bending the arms and bringing them in like that. You don't have to clasp your hands together, but I think it works well. So, chin down and back, arms high as you can get them. Okay, so we're here. Use your normal squat stance. And then approach it kind of like we talked about with the goblet squat, okay? So I'm going to bring hands together just so we can demonstrate that. Tailbone down. And then as you go down, just think knees forward, knees forward, knees forward, knees forward. Here to the bottom position. And then keep the knees forward. There. That's your bottom half there. No. And gone. See? So we have to keep that knees forward position. Otherwise we lose the bar, even if we have the arms high enough and we do everything else right, okay? So that's why the Frankenstein squat, in my opinion, is the best squat teaching tool, not necessarily the best squat variation. However, it will build your quads reasonably well. It will build your upper back reasonably well. And it's not uncommon to have athletes get to 70, 75% of their 1 rep max back squat on this variation. Quite often, it's not that uncommon either to have athletes get up to more on here than they can even on their Zercher squat, depending on their proportions and their relative strengths and weaknesses, okay? So if you do choose to go ahead and start performing these, the thing I would encourage you to do is start filming your squats from the side. Because then the whole point that this is here is to ingrain that forward knee position in the bottom and the hips and shoulders rising together. What we don't want is for you to somehow just get away with doing the squat wrong, inverted commas, right? So film your squats from the side and then make sure that we're getting this. So knees stay forward. At the bottom, as opposed to that. And if you are using it as a squat teaching tool, I would say allow the load to be limited by however you can maintain that technique. So as soon as you start seeing that backward knee shift out of the bottom and the hips coming up faster than the shoulders, that would mean that it's too heavy, at least in that specific context for that day or whatever, right? Because the goal is ingrain this pattern here where it's actually easier to achieve. The anterior loading is going to make it easier to get the knees forward and stay upright anyway. But then what we're trying to do is ingrain, when I'm at the bottom of a squat, doesn't matter what the squat variation is, how do I get out of the bottom? Because it's not as simple as just push, right? Because just push usually puts us here in that position we're actually trying to avoid. What we want to start doing is ingraining, right, this is how I get out of the bottom of the squat. The knees go forward, the head and neck come up and back, and the hips and shoulders move together. So hopefully that's useful. Hopefully you kind of understand the mechanics of what a squat is now a little bit better. And hopefully you kind of understand now why there may be a place for the Frankenstein squat in your squat assistance work, whatever it might be, to help ingrain that pattern. As always, thank you for supporting Elite FTS, and we will see you next time.